Hello and welcome to the Mysteries of History podcast with me, your host, Nick Monk. Each week together we will take a look at a fascinating piece of history. As gruesome, mysterious, unbelievable that these tales may sound, one thing is for sure. These events happened, these people existed, and these places have made their mark on our historical landscape. Be sure to check out the website, themysteriesofhistory.com, where you can access all of the podcasts and show notes. And of course the blog, where we will give you an extra insight into each episode, as well as all sorts of unbelievable historical content. You can also find us on social media, where you can let us know what you think of the podcast episodes, or even suggest a new historical mystery for us to investigate. So now, let's take a look at this week's mysterious historical tale. The death of a newborn baby. Crops failing, cattle and horses going suddenly lame and dying. These are bad omens indeed. Whispers begin in the community. They soon gather pace. Who is responsible for these dark arts? Is it the next door neighbour, the old lady who talks to herself, your wife or husband even? This is a world of fear and superstition. A debt must be paid back to society. Life is cheap. It is clear what is at play here. Witchcraft. Somebody has been dancing with the devil himself. Witchcraft in the United Kingdom has a rich and complex history interwoven with myths and folklore and historical events that have shaped its perception over many centuries. From ancient pagan traditions to modern-day practices, witchcraft has had a massive societal, legal and cultural effect, one that continues to this day. The roots of witchcraft in the UK extends back to ancient times, long before the term witch was ever really coined. Paganism, with its nature-centric worship and reverence for the natural world, forms the crux of early witchcraft practices. The Druids, a learned class in Celtic culture, were and are known for their deep connection to nature, their rituals, and their presumed magical abilities. In the past, they played a pivotal role as priests, healers, and sages, guiding their communities through spiritual and earthly challenges. Though not witches in the modern sense, their influence on later witchcraft tradition is undeniable. As Christianity spread across the British Isles, pagan practices were increasingly viewed with suspicion and hostility. The medieval period saw the rise of witch hunts, fueled by a combination of religious zeal, fear of the unknown, and social unrest. The Malleus Maleficarum, a treatise published in 1487, played a crucial role in shaping the witch hunts across Europe, including the UK. It detailed how to identify, interrogate, and punish alleged witches, often leading to brutal trials and executions. Witchcraft, a perceived facility to summon evil spirits and demons to do harm to others, was linked to religion to the extent that the medieval church had powers to punish those who dabbled in magic and sorcery. Its priests were able to exorcise those who had become possessed by malign spirits. During the 16th century, many people believed that witchcraft, rather than the workings of God's will, offered a more convincing explanation to sudden and unexpected ill fortune, such as the death of a child, bad harvests, or the death of cattle. Witch hunting became an obsession in many parts of the country and beyond into Europe and the New World. It was in 1542, under the reign of King Henry VIII, and just after the dissolution of the monasteries, that the Witchcraft Act was brought into law. This act made witchcraft a capital offence, punishable by death. Although this law was repealed 5 times, it was restored by a new act in 1562, during the reign of Elizabeth I, and also in 1604, where James I took a keen interest in demonology and even published a book on it. This only served to reinforce and expand the Witchcraft Act, leading to an increased number of trials and executions. These later acts also transferred the trial of witches from the church to the ordinary courts. Formal accusation against witches, who were usually poor, elderly women, reached a peak in the late 16th century, particularly in the southeast of England. 513 supposed witches were put on trial there between 1560 and 1700. 112 of those poor souls were executed. The most infamous of these witch trials in the UK occurred in places like Pendle in Lancashire and North Berwick in Scotland. The Pendle witch trials of 1612 saw the execution of 10 people accused of witchcraft based on dubious evidence and confessions extracted under duress and torture. Similarly, the North Berwick witch trials in 1590 involved the persecution of several individuals accused of plotting against King James VI of Scotland through the means of witchcraft. No discussion about witchcraft during this time period is complete without mentioning the name Matthew Hopkins, the Witchfinder General. Hopkins and his associates are responsible for the deaths of more than 300 women accused of witchcraft between 1644 and 1646, and be in no doubt that it was women that bore the brunt of the wrath of Hopkins and his associates. Contemporary witch hunters were very clear that women were more likely to be witches than men were. According to King James VI of Scotland and I of England, who simply described women as being inherently more susceptible to diabolical influence, he goes on to say, "As for that sex is frailer than men is, so it is easiest to be entrapped in those gross snares of the devil, as was over well proved to be true by the serpent's deceiving of Eve at the beginning, which makes him the homelier with that sex since." And so, with his moral compass firmly aligned with the religious doctrine, Hopkins appears to have assumed the title of Witchfinder General in 1645, claiming to be officially commissioned by Parliament with the brief to uncover and persecute witches. Together with his entourage known as Lady Prickers. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I did say Lady Prickers. They travelled the villages and towns of eastern England, trying and examining women for witchcraft and bringing fear to all. A true entrepreneur, Hopkins appears to have quickly turned his mission into a well-paid career. He charged 20 shillings a town, allegedly, although some even paid up to £23 for his services. Many of the methods that Hopkins adopted to investigate the cases of witchcraft were taken directly from King James's best-selling book, Demonology. Keeping a suspect awake for days on end until they were so sleep-deprived that they would confess to anything was a favourite method of hunting out witches. And so to the Lady Prickers, whose job involved cutting the arms of the accused with a knife, needle or pin, until the individual bled. But if they did not bleed, she was said to be a witch. However, with such a good living to be made from witch hunting, and indeed unmasking witches, blunt or retractable blades were often adopted to prove the presence of a witch. Hopkins, however, had a favourite and infamous form of torture and confessional known as the swimming test. To say that the odds were stacked against the poor woman who was accused of witchcraft is an understatement, but this was an unbelievable, simple but effective test. The woman could not win. They were simply bound by the arms and legs, placed on a chair and thrown into the village pond. If the poor soul sank and drowned, they would be innocent and received into heaven gladly. If they floated, however, they would be tried as a witch. With efficiencies such as this, it is no wonder that between the years 1644 and 1646, Hopkins and his associates are believed to have been responsible for the deaths of more than 300 women. And in the days when an average farm labourer's wage was just 6p a day, it's estimated that Hopkins may have collected fees of around £1,000 for his gruesome services. Services, though, that had the full backing of the state and the church. Hopkins, as we can see, was diligent in his work, and even wrote a short pamphlet detailing his witch-hunting methods. The Discovery of Witches, which was published in 1647, his own and personal work on how to efficiently rid the land of the disciples of the devil. The demise of Matthew Hopkins is unclear, but some say that he did face justice in the end, and perhaps even drowned undergoing his own swimming trial, after being accused of witchcraft himself. And so, as the 17th century draws to an end, we begin to see the last witch trials in the UK. These dark days of persecution are nearly over, but not quite. One of the last witch trials and executions occurred in Bideford in Devon. On the 25th of August 1682, 3 women from the town in North Devon, Temperance Lloyd, Susanna Edwards and Mary Trembles, were hanged at Hevertree just outside of Exeter. It would appear, though, that the judge who condemned these women to death, Sir Francis North, did not appear to believe in the reality of witchcraft himself, arguing that he nevertheless had to condemn the women because of the strength of public feeling. He said as follows: "With the country so fully possessed against them, we cannot reprieve them without appearing to deny the very being of witches, which, as it is contrary to law, so I think would be very ill of his Majesty's service." Unfortunately, though, we have to go to the early 18th century before we see the very last executions for witchcraft in England itself. In fact, we have to go to 1716 and the case of Mary Hicks and her 9-year-old daughter Elizabeth. Mary and Elizabeth Hicks resided in Huntington, a town in Cambridgeshire, and of course they were accused of having committed various acts of witchcraft, including causing storms and crop failures, a most common allegation against supposed witches. The early 18th century was a period of great uncertainty marked by political upheaval, economic hardship and lingering superstitions. The scapegoating of individuals such as Mary and Elizabeth offered the community a means by which they could channel their fears and frustrations. This case really does demonstrate how neighbourly allegiances were quickly shattered during this dark period of accusation of witchcraft. Mary, it is supposed, turned her attentions to Mr. Adams, a neighbour, with whom she had quarrelled. According to the description published in London that year, she made an image like him of wax, which putting on a spit and roasting before a fire, as that melted away, so did the neighbour suddenly waste away by degrees, and in 24 hours died in the greatest pain imaginable. There is particularly nothing unusual about this, however, though, because a woman accused of inflicting pain and illness on her neighbours using diabolical powers, as would be described, was quite common, and, of course, the individual would be accused of witchcraft. We can see that rumours within a close-knit community can quickly spread and cause one of their kin to be placed in a life-threatening position from which they would not ever recover. Where the case of Mary Hicks becomes quite unique is in the way that she is alleged to have convinced her daughter to sell her soul to the devil. She is alleged to have, of course, acquired her powers and then passed them on to her daughter one day. Allegedly, the daughter was watching a ship at sea from a window with her father when the girl demonstrated that she could cause a storm and wreck the ship. She later destroyed an entire field of corn, apparently. Edward, the father, the husband of Mary, duly questioned his daughter about where she had gained such abilities, and Elizabeth replied that her mother had taught her. Edward, sadly, a dutiful and law-abiding man, turned both his wife and daughter over to the justice of the peace. Of course, there was no evidence against Mary and Elizabeth Hicks as we would see it today. But that did not matter. The evidence against them was likely based on hearsay, superstition, and coerced confessions, as we know was typical in witch trials. On July 28, 1716, Mary and Elizabeth Hicks were hung in Huntington. Elizabeth was 9 years old. This is a tragic and harrowing event under any circumstances. But what it did do was mark the last instance of judicially sanctioned witch executions in England, signalling the beginning of the end of the witchcraft persecutions. However, this was not the end of executions based upon witchcraft in the United Kingdom. We now must fast forward to 1727 and take ourselves to Scotland. The Enlightenment is already underway across Europe. Newton has published his laws of motion, and the scientific method is beginning to take root. Coffee houses buzz with talk of reason and discovery. But in rural Scotland, another kind of thinking still holds power. Old, dark beliefs about devils, spells and witches. And in the tiny village of Dornoch in the Scottish Highlands, this fear still simmers beneath the surface. It is here that Janet Horn, an elderly woman, likely in her 60s, lives with her daughter, and her daughter is described as having a deformed hand and foot, possibly due to a condition like polio or congenital deformity. But in the superstitious minds of her neighbours, that deformity meant only one thing: witchcraft. The neighbours, of course, gossiped that the daughter looked as though she had hooves, and Janet was accused of turning her daughter into a pony to transport her around the countryside to carry out her witchcraft. They said she had used her daughter as a familiar, a demonic assistant. Of course, this story already sounds crazy to us here in the 21st century, but it gets worse. It is believed by the neighbours and the community that the deformity of the poor daughter was proof of witchcraft, in that Janet had failed to completely return her daughter from pony back into human form. Janet's legal options were very limited, and her trial was rushed through. The poor daughter did not escape either, and both her and her mother faced trial together. Indeed, a swift and tragically one-sided trial. It is said that Janet Horn showed signs of confusion, possibly what we may even interpret as early dementia, did not mount a defence. She may not have even fully understood what she was doing or the charges. Her daughter was either spared or may have even escaped, but Janet Horn was ordered to be executed the following day. Janet's demise was particularly brutal and harrowing. She was covered in tar and feathers and paraded through Dornoch in a barrel. When she arrived at her place of execution, Janet is said to have smiled and even warmed herself by the very fire that was about to consume her. The stone that marks the site of this tragedy can still be seen in Littletown, although the date on the stone, 1722, is wrong. It should read 1727. 9 years after the death of Janet Horn, the Witchcraft Acts were repealed in Scotland and England, and it became unlawful to execute anyone for alleged witchcraft. The Enlightenment period, with its emphasis on reason, science and empirical evidence, began to challenge the superstition and fear that had underpinned the witch hunts. Intellectuals, scientists and legal reformers increasingly criticised the irrationality and injustice of witch trials. The decline of witchcraft persecutions in England was also influenced by changes in the legal system. The Witchcraft Act of 1735, passed under George II, marked a significant shift in the legal approach to witchcraft. This act effectively decriminalised witchcraft, recognising it as a delusion rather than a crime, and instead targeted fraudulent claims of magical powers. This legal reform underscored the changing attitudes towards witchcraft and the growing influence of Enlightenment thinking. It will surprise you then to know that the actual last documented witch trial in the UK was in 1944. Here, Helen Duncan, a Scottish medium, was convicted under the Witchcraft Act of 1735 for conducting séances. She was found guilty at the Old Bailey and fined £5. Whilst the Witchcraft Act of 1735 was repealed in 1951, it was used to convict Helen Duncan in 1944. Today, we must look back at the history of the witch trials and the many executions in England, the UK and further afield as a dark chapter, but also as a lesson in the importance of protecting human rights and upholding the principles of justice. Museums, historical societies and academic institutions continue to study and commemorate this period, ensuring that the stories of those who suffered are not forgotten. As we remember this dark chapter, we are reminded of the importance of critical thinking, empathy and justice in building a more just and rational society. The 20th century has seen a revival in the interest in witchcraft, largely due to the efforts of individuals like Gerald Gardner. Gardner is often credited with founding modern Wicca, a contemporary pagan religious movement that draws on ancient traditions, folklore and ceremonial magic. Wicca emphasises the worship of the goddess and the god, the cyclical nature of life and the practice of ritual magic. Gardner's publication of Witchcraft Today in 1954 and The Meaning of Witchcraft in 1959 brought Wicca into the public eye, challenging lingering stereotypes and misconceptions about witches. Today, Wicca and other forms of modern paganism have a significant following in the UK, with numerous covens, associations and practitioners openly celebrating their beliefs and practices. Witchcraft has also left an indelible mark on British culture, influencing literature, art and the media. From Shakespeare's portrayal of the weird sisters in Macbeth to modern depictions in television series, the image of the witch has evolved, reflecting changing societal attitudes and interests. The history of witchcraft in the UK is a testament to the enduring allure and complexity of this phenomenon. From its ancient pagan origins to its persecution during the witch hunts, and its modern-day revival through Wicca, witchcraft has continually adapted and evolved. It serves as a mirror to society, reflecting our fears, aspirations, and the ever-changing boundaries between the sacred and the profane. As we move forward, the legacy of witchcraft in the UK remains a fascinating subject of study and a potent reminder of the power of belief and the human spirit.